We're learning the third Sikha of Parshas Korach in Chelek of Gimel on page 134. The shir today is being learned Lila Nishmas Rabbi ben Yamin ben Rab Menashe Koltman. In the Heintige Gesedere sagt der Teire der Din. In this week's Parsha, the Teire tells us the following halacha from B'choyer Shoir or B'choyer Kesev or B'choyer Eiz, a firstborn ox or a firstborn sheep or firstborn goat, as loiti pada, should not be redeemed. Kodesh, and they're holy. As damam tizre geimer, their blood is to be sprinkled on the mizbeach. Ves chelbam takte geimer, and the fats is to be burnt on the mizbeach. Ubesaram yiyeh lecha, and the meat of this carbon, of this b'chair, is for you. So the kayanim, it belongs to the kayanim. Kechazeyat nufa ukishoik hayamin lecha yiyeh, like the breast that's waved, and like the right thigh, it's yours. It should be for you, for the kayanim, that is. The pasuk is comparing. It's saying that the halacha of this meat of the b'chair that belongs to the kayanim could be compared to the chazeyat nufa and shoyka yamin. What's this comparison? One is mefarish, and Rashi explains shel shlomim. This refers to the chazeyat nufa and the shoyka yamin of a shlomim. Shenachalim lekayanim l'nasheim ulavneim ulavdeim, that could be eaten for the kainim themselves, their wives, their children, and their slaves. L'shnei yomim v'laylo echad, it could be eaten for 2 days and 1 night. Afa b'chair, so too when it comes here to the b'chair, nechol l'shnei yomim v'laylo echad. You can eat it for 2 nights and a day. Davon verstehen, so we need to understand what Rashi is saying here. Rashi hyped on by Shlomim mit zwei pratim. Rashi begins in explaining what we're comparing to what we're learning out from Shlomim and mentions 2 details. Aleph, ver ken ze essen. First, Rashi mentions who is allowed to eat, and that's the kayanim, l'nasheim, l'vneim, l'avdeim, the kayanim, their wives, children, and slaves. Beis, wenn ze werden gegessen. Another din, when can this meat be eaten, and that's l'shnei yomim v'layla echad, for 2 days and a night. But on his Messiahim, blois mit ein prat. Then when Rashi concludes and explains how that applies here by the b'chair, he only mentions 1 detail. Afa b'chair nechol l'shnei yomim v'layla echad. The b'chair can be eaten for 2 days and a night. Is tamua, so it's a wonder. It's difficult to understand what Rashi is saying here. Either way, it's not clear what Rashi's intention here is. Oib Rashi is mashmiti verte by b'chair, if Rashi omits those words that he mentioned in the beginning by the Shlomim, when it comes to explaining by b'chair. Because Rashi's opinion is that the meat of the b'chair could only be eaten by a kayin, which is a male, and not by the wife or the children or so on. So then it's not necessary to quote that halacha that is by Shlomim, since we're not comparing the b'chair for this detail. And if this din that they can eat like by Shlomim does apply to the b'chair, so then why does Rashi omit this when he explains the halacha of Shlomim that applies to b'chair? We'll move on. It's self-understood as mekanet zagen as Weiler will mekatzes and b'leshoin is Rashi mashmit adin, that since Rashi wants to write as concisely as possible, so therefore Rashi is skipping a din, a halacha that we're learning out from Shlomim. Additionally, the question here is, if Rashi is saying that the 2 halachas that he mentioned by Shlomim apply to b'chair as well, it's not even necessary to add and spell out regarding the b'chair that you could eat it for 2 days and a night. Now, Rashi could just say in short, that the 2 halachas that were just spelled out regarding the Shlomim, that a b'chair is the same. Other b'chlal oislos in dem ganzen siyam afa b'chair b'chol. Or furthermore, Rashi could just leave out that entire conclusion of afa b'chair, and it's understood shel shlomim when it says chazeh tnuf and sheika yamin, and Rashi spells out that this means the shlomim and the halachas that there are by shlomim, and it's understood that that's what the pasuk is saying here, that this applies by b'chair as well. The tmiyah is noch grosser. The wonder on Rashi's language here is even greater. The hamakah from the Pirish Rashi is in Sifriya Gemara. The source of this Rashi is both in Sifriya and in the Gemara. Und in die Beite Erter wird in ganzen the Mont and Prat von Nechel Akainim L'Nesheim Ulavneim V'Lavdeim. There it doesn't mention this detail of who could eat, that including the wives, children, and slaves can eat as well. Nit by Shlomim, not when it brings what the halacha is by Shlomim, or nit by B'chair, and not when it explains what we learn out, what we apply by B'chair. A state blois, all it says there is, ma shlomim necholim l'shnei yomim v'layla echad, af b'choir nechol l'shnei yomim v'layla echad. Just speaks about the timing of the eating that we learn out from Shlomim that you can eat for 2 days and a night. Und Rashi is mishane von Sifri u Gemara. Rashi changes from the language of Sifri and Gemara on his meisif then prat b'pirushay. And Rashi adds this other detail of who could eat, that it goes also on the wives and so on. Why is Rashi adding this if in the source of where Rashi takes his pirush from, it's not mentioned at all? Danach is Rashi maitig die Werte l'choyiyah. Then Rashi brings the last two words of the pasuk where it says l'choyiyah and is mefarish, and he explains ba Rabbi Akiva v'lomat or v'limit. Rabbi Akiva came and taught that Haisef L'cha Kosav Havaya Cheres. The Torah is adding again the term of L'cha Yiyah, that it should be for you. Shaloi Taimar, so that you shouldn't say Chazev V'shoik Shal Taida. That we're comparing the halacha of the Bechor to a Chaza and Shaik of a Shlomim, but which Shlomim? Maybe the Shlomim which is a Taida. The Taida is the carbon Shlomim that's brought when a person was in a situation of danger, and then he's bringing a carbon to thank Hashem. Now that carbon shlomim, the taida, she'ein echel ela l'yom v'layla. You could only eat it for 1 day and 1 night. So therefore the taida adds l'chayiyah again to let me know that it's adding that we say that we compare it to the chazeh and the shaik of a shlomim that can be eaten for 2 days and a night. So on the words of Rashi here, we need to understand as follows. Alef v'geret kama pomim, already said many times. As Rashi is Rashi maitig dem shem bala maimer. Nor in fal, when this is Meisiv and Avanis Pirish. Rashi only quotes the name of the one that's saying this Pirish if it's going to add the understanding of what he's saying here. Benitten done in our case. Was werto besser verstandig durch die Idee as der Maimad gesagt Rabbi Akiva. What additional understanding do we get from this that we know that this statement here was said by Rabbi Akiva? Beis, another question here is, was is the Arichas HaLoshen? Ba Rabbi Akiva v'limit. Rabbi Akiva came and taught. Rashi had gedacht sagen b'kitzer kedarkei bekam mekaymis Omer Rabbi Akiva. Rashi should have said, as he does very concisely in other places, if you want to quote by name, Rabbi Akiva said, what's the bod? Rabbi Akiva came and taught. The makir from Maimer Rabbi Akiva is in Sifri Gemara. The source, as mentioned before, is in the Sifri and the Gemara. And Dorten is Eich HaLoshen Bilti Ragel. There's also an unusual expression, Kofatz Rabbi Akiva. That Rabbi Akiva jumped up and said. Now, aber Dorten is das verstandig. The fact that it uses this expression is understood. Weil kommt inmitten a shakle v'tarye, because that's in the middle of a discussion about the salacha. Früher hat man gefragt, die Scheile lefnei Chachamim bekerem beyavne chola. The Scheile was asked by the Chachamim in the vineyard in Yavne. And then Rab Tarfon chola. Rab Tarfon gave an answer. Hat Rabbi Yossi Galili gefragt, Akasha, was Rab Tarfon hat nicht gekannt empferen. Rabbi Yossi Galili asks a question that Rab Tarfon couldn't answer. Is an under arai in the shakle v'tarye, so there's another Tana that now jumped into this discussion. Kafas Rabbi Akiva Amachul. Rabbi Akiva jumped into the discussion and he said, that's what uses the term kafas, because this was an ongoing discussion amongst other Tanaim, and Rabbi Akiva jumped into this discussion. Aber wie passt aber Pirish Rashi der Loshen ba Rabbi Akiva wenn die ganze shakle v'tarye wird mit dem Mund? But why does Rashi use this expression that Rabbi Akiva came and explained if in Rashi there's no discussion mentioned at all? Gimel, another question here is, as b'choir nechol shnei yomim v'layla echad. The fact that a b'choir can be eaten for 2 days and a night, darf man it ankommen zu a yisaf l'chayiyah. It's not necessary to learn it out from the extra words here l'chayiyah, which is, as Rashi puts it, haisef l'cha kosav havoya acheres. That din learnt man up from pasuk shana b'shana in Parshas Rei. It's learned out from another pasuk, Shana B'Shana, in Parshas Revi. Rashi is dort mefarish Lomad Shenecha B'Choir L'Shnei Yomim V'Layla Echad. That it's teaching this halacha that the B'Choir can be eaten for 2 days and a night. So why is Rashi saying that here L'Chayiyah is coming to explain this halacha? Daled, another question here is Al Derech Hapshat. When you learn the simple understanding of the words L'Chayiyah, from Vanet is the Hechrech as L'Chayiyah, that the words L'Chayiyah is a ribui, that it's coming actually to add something more. Haisiv l'cha kasav avoya acheres, that the Pasuk here is coming to add another term in order to add more to the timing in this new halacha that they can eat the time of 2 days and a night. Where do you see this in the words l'chayiyah? So to explain all of this, explain what Rashi is saying here, what exactly is the halacha we're learning out from the Shlomim to the Bechor, and why Rashi begins with 2 halachas and then ends with 1 halacha, And as Rabbi will explain very clearly why Rashi brings Rabbi Akiva with this unusual expression of Ba Rabbi Akiva. And the Rebbe will restructure here how we're supposed to read this Rashi. Rashin is schwer, der Yitur Aloshin in unser Pasuk. First, the question that Rashi is bothered by is, there's extra words here in the Pasuk. The L'chaire, because seemingly, Nachtem v'yeshteit u'besaram yeh lecha. That the meat of this carbon belongs to you, as the basar abchor belongs to our kain, belongs to the kain. Was kommt meisiv zayin of them, die Werte kachazei atnufa k'sheika yamin lecha yeh. Why does it have to add and make this comparison like the waved breast and like the right thigh? It should be for you. What's that adding? The far lernt Rashi as die Werte kommen lernen adin. In was faran oifen vert besaram nechal. So therefore, it must be that it's not just simply coming to say the fact that it belongs to the kain, but rather it's coming to say a halacha in what manner does this meat belong to the kain? How should it be eaten by him? Now, which din is it teaching? If we were to say that these words are just coming to tell us the timing of when you can eat it, and that is for 2 days and a night, like the chaz and shaik of the shlamim, is nit verstandig. So then it wouldn't be understood why the pasuk uses this expression. Why would the pasuk have to hint this? Sagen dem din durch vergleichen zu an ander carbon. To say this halacha by comparing it to another carbon mit die Werte kechazei atnufa k'sheika yamin. Befrat as dan is esh nit klar, and by doing this, by saying these words and comparing it, not saying the din straight up, but by comparing it to another carbon, it's not even clear, because it's not clear to this name shel shlamim shenachal l'shnei yom v'layla echad. Is that the usual shlamim that you can eat for 2 days and a night? Other shel taida shenachal l'yom v'layla, or maybe it means the taida that can be eaten only 1 day and a night. Umedarf haben noch ha'isafeh v'limud l'cha yeh havaya acheres. Then the Torah has to add again l'cha yeh, to add another term here, to say that it is 2 days and a night. Instead, es hat gedarft stehen klar u bekitzer. The Torah can say very clearly and concisely that the carbon can be eaten on the day that it was brought and the following day, and you would understand that this means 2 days and the night in between. So this term of k'chazei atnufa k'sheika yamin, it's extra, and you can't say that it's just coming to teach this one halacha of the timing of eating it. The fun is Rashi machriach. So from this language in the pasuk, Rashi proves that we must say as mitiverte kechazei atnufa k'sheika yamin meint man mer vider ein din. The pasuk here is making this comparison because it wants to include in this more than one din, not zwei din. There's 2 things we learn out from this. One is shenechalim, that it's eaten aleph lekainim l'neshem l'vneim lavdeim. Who can eat it? It can be eaten by the kainim, the wives, the children, and the slaves. And beis l'shnei yomim v'layla echad. And the timing as well, that it's for 2 days and a night. So that's why the Torah uses this expression, because it includes more than one halacha. It's making the general comparison of the b'chor to the shlamim that includes these 2 halachas. With this we can understand why Rashi says that we learn out that don't make the mistake that this refers to the chaz and shaik of the taida, which is for 1 day and a night. So Rashi says we have to learn it specifically here from the extra words l'chayiyah. And Rashi does not want to rely on the fact that it could be learned out from a different pasuk in Parshas Rei. Why? Because if we were to say, as in unser pasuk is nitok ken limud wegen zman achilas b'chor, that in our pasuk it's not clarifying and it's not teaching the timing of when you eat this b'chor. That eis kommen as mit gechaza atnufa k'sheik hayamin meint the pasuk bloizein din. So then we're back to the point mentioned before that this comparison of chazeh tnufa and k'sheik hayamin is really just for 1 din, and that is nechol l'kayin l'neshem l'vneim l'avdeim. Who could eat it? So ver kanal. So then the question would be, favaz zog the pasuk dem din mit haremes k'chazeh atnufa k'sheik hayamin. If it's only teaching 1 din, why would it write it in this comparison, in this kind of a hint? Unit beferish. Why wouldn't the Torah just say explicitly that 1 din that it's coming to teach? Ubefrat, and especially as far them steht ya beferish. Earlier, when the Torah wants to talk about who could eat, there the Torah writes it clearly by trumas matonam l'chol tnufis b'nei Yisrael. There the pasuk says l'chon nesatim ulevanecha ulevneisecha. It's for you, for your sons and daughters. And you can learn from this as well that if it's not limited to just the kainim, the males that eat, so then it could be eaten also by the wives and the slaves as well. So here the Torah could use the same kind of expression as it does earlier if it's just coming to teach us one din who is eating it. The Far learned Rashi, so therefore Rashi explains, as l'chayiyah, when the Torah adds here the words l'chayiyah, kumt klar machen dem din von shnei yomim v'layla echad. That the Torah is coming to clarify the timing of the eating as well, that it could be for 2 days and a night. And if that's the case, it comes out as mitivert chazei atnufa kishay kayamin. When the Torah says chazei atnufa and shay kayamin, kumt the pasuk sagen zwei dinim. So the Torah is actually coming to teach 2 dinim, sai as nechal l'kayin l'shneim v'neim lavdeim, who could eat it, and also on sai as nechal l'shnei yom v'layla echad, and the timing that it could be eaten for 2 days and a night. That's how Rashi understands this pasuk. So this is our answer of why Rashi switches from what it says in the Gemara. When the Gemara speaks about this comparison of chazei atnufa and shei kayamin, all the Gemara says is the halacha of it being eaten 2 days and a night. It doesn't mention the other halacha of who could eat. And Rashi changes from the Gemara and says no, that if the Torah would be teaching only one din, it wouldn't hint by this kind of comparison. It would write out clearly that one din. The fact that it's making this comparison, a more general comparison of the Shlomim to the Bechor, is because it's teaching 2 dinim in this comparison. Es bleibt aber nicht verstandig, kanal, however, what remains still unanswered, as asked before, was is Rashi Messiah blois mit dem Prat? If in fact we do learn out both of these details, so then why does Rashi only conclude with one? That afa b'chor nechal l'shnei yomim v'layla echad. That by b'chor as well it can be eaten for 2 days and a night. What happened to the other halacha? That it can be eaten by the whole family. So the explanation of this detail here is, and here the Rebbe shows us how we have to read the Rashi to restructure the words of Rashi. The tzvei pirushe Rashi. The 2 different pirushim that Rashi explains in this pasuk. One is on the words kechazei atnufa k'shei kayamin, on l'chayiyah, and then when Rashi explains the words of l'chayiyah, zenenit bazundere ot getelte pirushim. They're not separate, separated explanations on 2 different parts of the pasuk. No, this is ein hemshech. It's really all one continuation. And this is how you have to read the Rashi. Rashi sagt dem limud von Shlomim. First, Rashi tells you what we're learning out from the Shlomim. Und the siyum von dem sind die Wörter af abachor. And the conclusion of Rashi telling you the 2 halachas that we learn out from the comparison to Shlomim is with the words af abachor. That so too by bachor it's the same. And Rashi does not spell out what it's the same for because it's understood. Azay v'di dinei chazav v'sheik shel Shlomim. Azay zenin dinei abachor. Whatever halachas that Rashi just mentioned, the 2 halachas that apply by the chazah and shleik of Shlomim, so too is the halacha by bachor. That's the conclusion of the 2 points that Rashi is telling us that we learn from chazei atnufa k'shei kayamin. Und danach häupt on Rashi and sagt that zweiten inyan. And then Rashi goes on to explain another point here. B'nigeya dem din hanal, regarding the din that's just mentioned that we learn out 2 dinim. So regarding one of the dinim that we just mentioned here, that it can be eaten for 2 days and a night, is doa hemshech. So here Rashi continues and clarifies, upirish, and adds more. That l'chayiyah ba Rabbi Kiva v'lamat chulu. That from the words l'chayiyah, Rabbi Kiva came and explained and taught how we actually know that it's 2 days and a night and not 1 day and a night. By dem prat, regarding this then that we're learning here, is nit genug di limud von die Werte chazei atnufa k'shei kayamin shel Shlomim. It's not enough to just learn it from the comparison of chazei atnufa and shei kayamin. Because with those words, I would think maybe to compare to the Taida, which is 1 day and a night. We need the continuation of the pasuk where it says l'chayiyah, which is ha'isif l'cha kasav havaya acheres. The Taida is adding an additional havaya, an additional term to tell you that it comes to say that it can be eaten for 2 days and a night. Okay, so based on this, we understand this is the answer to the question of why Rashi does not conclude with the 2 dinim that he started with. He only concludes with 1. The answer is Rashi doesn't conclude with any of the dinim. You have to stop by the words af ha-b'chor. Af ha-b'chor is just like Shlomim that we already mentioned the 2 dinim. Period. And then nechal l'shnei yomim v'layla echad. This that we just said that it's eaten for 2 days and a night. So then Rashi continues l'chayiyah. That from the continuation of the pasuk, Rabbi Kiva comes and clarifies what this means. Why Rashi uses this expression that Rabbi Kiva came and taught. Rashi wants to make it clear as the Pirish is nita haschalas inyan. It's not a new subject. This Rashi l'chayiyeh is not a new and separate Rashi with a new subject. Was demol pasnit the lashon ba Rabbi Akiva. Then this expression of Rabbi Akiva came does not fit. Then Rashi would say Amar Rabbi Akiva, like a new concept. Rabbi Akiva said the following. When it says ba Rabbi Akiva, as the Rebbe showed in the expression of the Gemara, when we're in the middle of discussing something, and then Rabbi Akiva comes in and adds, so then you use the term, the Gemara uses the term kofatz, or Rashi here uses the term ba. Rabbi Akiva came into this subject to clarify. Now says a hemshech on a mitten the pirish the keshet to the free the gewerte l'shnei yom v'layla echad. So rather, by saying the words ba Rabbi Akiva, Rashi clarifies that Rabbi Akiva is coming to clarify what we just mentioned, that it's 2 days and a night that you could eat. Rashi b'avon de kasha of l'shnei yom v'layla echad. Rashi is clarifying the question that we have on this, that we said that it can be eaten for 2 days and a night. How do we know to compare to the shlomim and not to the taida? So therefore Rashi says, Rabbi Akiva came and clarified this point. That's the term of ba that Rashi says, so you should understand that this Rashi here is a follow-up to the last few words that Rashi said in the previous Rashi, That's the correct way how to read the words of Rashi. You just got to know where to put the period, and then it makes sense. After all of this, still a very seasoned student will ask the following question: as the lashon pasuk is nitten ganzen glattig, that the language of the pasuk is still not smoothly understood. The pasuk chazitiv demselben lashon, yeh lecha and lecha yeh. Pasuk repeats the same expression. First yeh lecha and then lecha yeh is mistaber to zogin. It would be logical to say as das retzach in demselben inyan, that the repetition is on the same exact point, which is kedei lechaskei. The Torah repeats the same thing again just to emphasize it and to strengthen the point. Al derech vi an onei from Parshas Shlach. A similarity to this we find at the beginning of Shlach, where it says shteit ish echad lamata. One man for each of the shvatim that were the 12 meraglim. Al derech zeh by the Kabbanis Hanesim state nasi echad layayim, nasi echad layayim. One nasi for each day that brought his carbon. But Rashi is dort nit mefarish from kefal aloshin. Rashi doesn't bother explaining what's the redundancy. Al derech hapshat is das kedei lechazik ulahadgishin, because simply it's just coming to emphasize and make the point clear. So here as well, when the Torah writes yeh lecha and lecha yeh right afterwards, it seems like that it's just coming to highlight the same point again. But according to the way Rashi is explaining this, and as we explained Rashi here, it comes out as the erste Teil from Pasuk. In the first time, the Pasuk says that the meat is going to be for you compared to the chazayat nufa and sheker yamin of the shlamim is nitadim prati. The words yeh lecha is not teaching a specific halacha, not adin klali. It's actually coming to teach the general comparison between b'chayr and the shlamim. A klal is get zugleichen zu chazav v'sheik shel shlamim on in mervi ein prat, and the comparison includes more than one detail, which is nechel l'kayin alu n'shem chulu, who could eat it, or nechel l'shnei yamin chulu, and that it could be eaten for 2 days, and so on. On the lashon l'cha yeh b'siyam pasuk, and then on the same expression of l'cha yeh in the end of the pasuk, kommt mar b'zayin ein prat. There, that term l'cha yeh is only coming to add one detail, and then din from zman achilasa, regarding the din of when it could be eaten. So why should we say that the redundancy of the exact same term is not just coming to emphasize the point again, but it has two different things that we're learning out from this? Far is Rashi madgish, so therefore Rashi here highlights and tells us as der maimer anal gezok Rabbi Akiva, the one that said this is Rabbi Akiva. Ulishitasa yazal, and Rabbi Akiva follows his opinion that we find in other places. Was haltnit as dibra Torah koloshim b'nei yadam, that he doesn't hold of this, that the Torah will speak and write in the language of people speaking. On a kefil lashon in Torah is nit l'shem chizuk v'chayetze b'zeh, and therefore we don't say that the redundancy in the Torah is just in order to emphasize the point, as it is in the style of speech when you repeat something to emphasize the point. Nor b'chdei zu mar b'zayin an inyan neisef. Rather, when you say again another term here, it's coming to add something new. L'shaynais ribuyin hein. The languages of the Torah, if it's adding something extra, it's coming to include and add another din here. On the far learned euch benitten die done. So therefore, in our case as well, Rashi understands as l'cha yeh is a ribui. That the term l'cha yeh that the Torah adds here is coming to add something more. Haisif l'cha hakasav havaya acheres. That the Torah is coming to add an additional havaya, an additional term of yeh to learn a new prat in this din of the timing of when you can eat. So therefore, once we know this is Rabbi Akiva's approach, we understand that the words l'cha yeh is a new ribui to clarify regarding the time of eating. We can't ask on this that we don't follow in Pshuta Shel Mikra this idea of Dibra Torah Kaloshim B'nei Yadam, that the Torah is coming to just highlight a point and it says it again and again. Vi can Rashi learn v'shittas Rabbi Akiva as lo yamrin on Dibra Torah Kaloshim B'nei Yadam. How can we say that Rashi follows Rabbi Akiva's opinion that we do not say that the Torah speaks in the style the way people speak? V'shas Rashi nemt on in derech hapshat as Dibra Torah Kaloshim B'nei Yadam. If we see that in other places, Rashi does explain in the simple understanding of a pasuk that the Torah does speak the way people do. Kedemochach from them, as it's clear from the fact that Rabbi Akiva learned, Rabbi Akiva's opinion is as the keiful lashon ish echad lamata. The redundancy regarding the meraglim, as mentioned before, when it says ish echad and ish echad, kumt mar bezayin as an geven chov dalet meraglim. Rabbi Akiva's opinion is that there were actually 24 meraglim. Rashi learned Kipshuta Shel Mikra. Rashi, though, understands in the simple understanding of the pasuk as an given blois yud beis meraglim. There were only 12 meraglim, which means that according to Rashi, we're not going to say that ish echad lamata is coming to add another point, additional meraglim. Rather, the Torah is just writing it to emphasize the point. So, but the reason is, though, that's different. Veldorten retzich wegen 12 verschiedene b'malosam shvatim. There we're talking about 12 different, and different also in their level of different shvatim. Is verstandig, al derech hapshat, as the posik will madgish sein, as jede shevet und gehat ish echad. So therefore there, it's understood that the Torah wants to highlight this point, that every shevet had their own representative on their level, representing them, and each shevet is very unique. Und the far is a keifel ish echad, and therefore the Torah repeats the term of ish echad. By the Karbanas HaNesiim, similar, when the Torah repeats the term of Nasi by the Nesiim, each one of the Nesiim is unique, their own shevet with their own carbon that they brought. Which is not the case here, is Dr. Keifel V'Adgasha L'Chayiyeh Ibrik. Over here, it's totally extra. So over here, Rashi says that according to Rabbi Akiva, l'chayiyeh, if we're talking about one and the same subject, the Torah doesn't repeat the language again to just emphasize the point. Rather, it has to be adding a new din here. This is Rabbi Akiva's opinion that Rashi accepts. The wine of Torah, the deepest secrets of Torah that we find here in this Rashi. In Sefriu Gemara is do a havaminut zu vergleichen b'choyer zu chatas v'asham. Both in Sefriu and Gemara, there's a thought to say that we compare the halacha of this b'chayr, the meat that the kainim eat from the b'chayr, to the halachas of the chatas and the yasham. Weil zei alle zenen matana lekainim, because by the chatas and yasham as well, all the meat is a gift for the kainim. Unlernen, and therefore to learn out ma chatas v'asham liyayin v'layla, af b'chayr liyayin v'layla. Just like the chatas and yasham, the timing of eating it is for a day and a night. So too by the b'chayr is only for the day and the night. Aber Rashi b'pirushay b'varn blois shleitoymek chazav v'sheik shel toida. Rashi doesn't bring up that point that it may be compared to chatas and asham. Rather, all Rashi says is that the Torah is coming to clarify, not to compare to the toida. The pashtus is the tam. Simply, the reason is that Rashi shtaltzachai from pasuk chazei atnufa k'sheik hayamin. Rashi is explaining the term that the pasuk here says. And this term was kenet geteicht werden of chatas v'asham. That can't be referring to the chatas and the asham, that the b'chayr is like the chatas and the asham, velcha belangin in ganzen zum kain. Over there, all the meat belongs to the kain, not just the breast and the thigh. Mashenkin in Sefriu Gemara. On the other hand, though, in the Sefriu and the Gemara, wo die shakel v'tariyet, so velchen carbon b'chayr v'er zugeglichen, the Gemara discusses to which carbon we're going to compare the halacha of the eating of the b'chayr, is nit mitzad the pasuk chazei atnufa goyim. The discussion is not based on the language of the pasuk, nor mitzad asvara. The Gemara is discussing this logically, which one we would compare them to. So therefore, the Gemara entertains the idea to compare the b'chayr to the chatas and the asham. Oh, but yesh loymar as in them is echda an inyan al derech haremes. There's here another point that we could learn out of this as a hint of why Rashi says that we may think to compare to taida. Doesn't bring up chatas and asham, But the Gemara does entertain the idea to compare the Bechor to the Chattas and the Yasham. Bechor is a remez of Yidden. This carbon Bechor here hints to Yidden, which are referred to in the pasuk as Beni Bechori Yisrael, my son, the firstborn, the Yidden. Now, Bechor Adam, the Bechor amongst people, by human being, Hashem Adam Elyon, the term Adam means a human being which is compared to Hashem, the supernal one. Chelek Alika Mimal, so this is the Yid that has a neshama, which is a piece of Hashem from above, is the Nefesh Elokis, so that is the neshama of a Yid. Bechor Behema Tahira, and the firstborn of a behema, a pure, a kosher animal, is the nefesh habahamis von a Yid. That refers also to a Yid, but to the animalistic soul of the Yid. When the Far Zak the pasuk b'choisher, kesev, eis, the pasuk here speaks about the three different bechorim, whether the bechor an ox or a sheep or a goat. Vazenim ki yidua the drai klolos de gesugim in nefesh habahamis Yisrael. These are the three categories generally that there are in the kind of nefesh habahamis that there is amongst Yidden. Is Rashi, so now based on this, we can say the following hint. That Rashi here, in his Pirish on Chumash, Rashi does not have to clarify and negate the idea as Bechor is gleich zu Chattas v'Asham, to compare the Bechor to a Chattas and Asham. Because Rashi that comes to explain the plain and simple understanding of the pasuk. And here what's being highlighted is the simple essence of what Yid is. There is no room at all to say as a Yid mitzad atzmai hat a shayches zu Chattas v'Asham, that any Jew, for who he is to himself, has any connection whatsoever to any kind of level of Chattas and Asham, which is any kind of Aveda. There's no reason to negate, to compare, to say that we don't compare the Bechor to Chattas and Asham, and it's obvious. Now, this is true both regarding the Neshama of a Yid, steht in the Zohar, as it clearly says in the Zohar, bepashtus, upshitus, oifum pasik, nefesh kisechta. The Zohar says this very simply and directly, that nefesh kisechta, when the pasuk says that a Yid will sin, and so the Zohar says in this, tva, that this is a wonder. In other words, so the Zohar here is saying this simply, and the Zohar is saying this, that it's so obvious that it's even a wonder. How could it be that a Jew would sin? As afila in bechinas nefesh. What this means is, the nefesh elokis, there's also various different levels. And even on the level of nefesh, which is the nidrigste darge from the chamisha shemesh and nikru, the nefesh elokis, being the lowest of the 5 levels of the neshama, is atmiyo pliya. Wie kann sie durchfallen in achet? How would it even be possible on any level of the neshama that he should stumble and do an aveda? That's something that's clear and obvious as it's stated in the Zohar. However, here Rashi is telling us even something more than this. As that even the Bechor of the Behema, which hints to the Nefesh HaBahamis von a Yidin, the animal soul of the Jew, is mitzad atzmai nitshayach zu achet. The Nefesh HaBahamis itself, for what it is, has no connection to doing any sin. And even more, we're talking here about the meat of this carbon that hints to the guf hagashmi shalai, the physical body of a Yid, is oichnita kein kasal kedaitach zu vergleichenim machen hashayches zu achatas v'asham, to compare to that should be any relation to an aveda which is hinted in the chatas and the yasham. So that's the chiddush of Rashi here. When how far we take this point regarding the existence of a Yid, that on no level, for sure not the neshama, even the nefesh habahamis and the guf as well, on no level does a Yid have any relation to any aveda. So Rashi doesn't even negate this point to say that we don't compare the shlamim to the chatas and the yasham. What do we compare the Bechor to the shlamim? Das was the nefesh lekis von a Yidin is yarda when is slapsha in a nefesh habahamis and a guf gashmi. The fact that the neshama of a Yid descends and gets enclosed in an animalistic soul and in a physical body in this world is bichdei ezal defamachen ashlamim, is in order that the Yid should create a carbon shlamim out of this, which is shalom ba'olam, to bring peace into the world. As oich olam hazeh hatachtin hagashmi v'achumri, that this low physical world, low coarse world, zolveren adir le'yizbarach, should become a dwelling for Hashem. That's the comparison of the Bechor, which refers to the neshama of the Yid, or the firstborn of the behema, the nefesh habahamis, where the neshama is in, that its aveda together is to create a dwelling place for Hashem here in this world. Vos daf Rashi yeshel zayin. What is Rashi negating here regarding this Bechor, which is the Yid, even the Nefesh Ba'amis of the Yid? Shaloi toima kechazei v'shoik shel taida. Don't compare the Bechor to the chaz and shoik of a carbon taida. What's the carbon taida? Oich taida is a carbon shlamim. The carbon taida is also a kind of carbon shlamim. However, there's a difference here. In Yana is, what is the point of this carbon? As frier is that Adam gewen in a matzav shel sakana. As mentioned, the carbon taida is brought when a person was found in a situation of danger. Und is the phone geratet wird geworden in an eifem bilti ragel. And he was saved from this in an unusual manner, bederechnes, miraculously. Und the far bringt a carbon taida. And he brings the carbon taida to thank Hashem for this. Was an Aveda Ruchnis meint is, applying this back to the spiritual Aveda of a Yid, what this refers to is, as der Mensch hat a greisen Nisayan, a person that experienced a great challenge, und Schwierigkeiten bei Vedasi is Barach, and difficulty in serving Hashem. Was stellen in Sakane Chai Varuchnim, that place in danger his entire spiritual life. Nor wird sich von der Matzev durch Hanes, and this person gets saved from this kind of situation by a miracle. And what's the miracle? Durch an Aveda, bilti regila, by an unusual serving Hashem, and with an unusual effort, shehergel nasa teva. When a person is accustomed to one way, that becomes his nature, and here he has to go beyond that. Durch mesiris nefesh shalamayla mitam v'das, by a level of self-sacrifice which is beyond any level of reason and logic. That's what the carbon taida is hinting to. Und the far, so now we can understand, is da a kasol kedaitach. There's room to think. Even though it's true, that a Yid on no level it has any relation to an actual Aveda. However, but because of the physical body and the animalistic soul of the Jews, which is what we're talking about here in the Bechor of the Behemah, is a shayich to nisyonis v'chayetze bezeh. So this Yid can experience challenges, shal sakana, dangers in his Avodas Hashem, azoit, and to the point as the shlamim, the shalom ba'ilam, that the carbon shlamim that the neshama is here in the world for, to bring peace into the world, but that tutayv is verbunden mit nas v'tayda, that he has to work on is something that comes with difficulty, and he's going to have to work very hard on this in a kind of Aveda that's going to be like a miracle. That's what we would think to say, to describe the nature of the Aveda of a Yid in this world, with that when he has a Nefesh Ba'amis and a Guf to contend with. Is Rashi Shoylol Oich Dik Sol Kedaitach. Rashi here comes to negate even this approach. Varom, because what's Rashi? Rashi's Pshutish Mikra, and therefore Rashi focuses on the simple essence of the Yid. Varom mitzad the pashtus von a Yidin, looking at who the Yid is, not on any level, on any layer of his existence, of his personality, but on the very simple essence of who he is, the purity of the Yid. It's shining in his life, and it's clear to him the simple belief in one Hashem. A Yid is always faithful to Hashem in any kind of situation or condition. If I feel to the extent as by him is melachatchil in a dog in art of inyanim shel hepecholo. By a Yid is from the first moment no room for anything that's the opposite of this truth of the oneness of Hashem. For a Yid to fool himself, to think that he should, God forbid, or could, God forbid, do an Aveda and think that he's still totally connected in his Yiddishkeit. It's clear to him what it is exactly that he's doing and where and what the Achdus of Hashem is. So it's not even, you can't describe the nature of the Aveda of a Yid as a test and as a challenge and as a difficulty. Das Gufe, was a Yid fühlt, as es da Metzias shel Nisayin chulu. This itself, if a Yid does see and experience his serving Hashem as something where it's with difficulty and it's a big challenge and he has to fight and he has to save himself from this, and especially when you need to have a level of a miracle, what this indicates is, as by him, there's something that's not Jewish, something that's not in sync with his neshama that's involved in his life. Al derech v'chatas v'asham was a Yid mitzadatzma hot kishayches nitzu. Like the chatas and asham, a level of an aveda that a Yid, for who he is, has no connection to this. V'alal piteva von a Yid, looking at the real and true nature of a Yid, hotenit kishayches zu inyanim von hepech hatayv. There's from the first moment no relation to any of these things that are negative. So they don't pose any threat to his Avodah, they don't create a challenge, and there's no difficulty, and there's no reason for miracles. Und the phone kommt euch herab in Gashmias. This also trickles down also to the physical well-being of a Yid. As when a Yid is wie es bedarf zu sein. When a Yid is behaving and doing and connected to his true self as it should be, darf it ankommen zu kenissim. Even in his physical life, he won't have to rely on any miracles, and then to bring a carbon taida to thank Hashem for this miracle. Regarding his physical condition. Because the true nature of what the way things should be with the Yid is Hashem imay. Hashem is always with the Yid there. Hashem shemrecha, Hashem tzilcha, al yad yaminecha. Hashem is your guardian, Hashem is your shadow, and Hashem is there on your right hand. With the light, with the countenance of the king, there's only life. The Reibishter gitim, and therefore Hashem provides for a Yid alle inyanim, all in all matters, from bana, chaye, mezayne, his children, and health, and parnasa, and livelihood, ubekulam, and with all of them, reviche, that it should be in abundance.